So let's move on to the next part, Leena.
Sure,
Please.
with pleasure. So, فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. Right, which is in English, therefore righteous women are devoutly pious, qanitat, keeping private what God has ordained be so kept.
Okay. So the problem we face here typically is that Qanitat is translated as a devoutly obedient wife. So
big problem that is absolutely shocking to me, I have to tell you, as an Arabic speaker, because qunut is something that is only for God. A human being bows only to God. A human being, astaghfirullah, this is shirk to suggest that you can apply qunut to another human being.
yeah, we have Dua Qunut, which we recite every night. And we don't, it's the same word. Yeah.
It's shocking that any translation has ever dared to convert it or translate it or interpret it as, you know, obedience to a husband, whereas qunut is absolutely to you know, an attitude of reverence and devout piety, and however you want to describe it, that you know, we are to reserve for God and only God. So you know, I think this one is very telling. When translations have done that, I think they expose themselves immediately as to where they're coming from, and rely on us not questioning or going back to the original word and what it means. And it has only one meaning, and it's for God.
It's for God. And often what you find in translations is that translators will add in brackets.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are devoutly obedient, and in brackets, to their husbands.
Yes.
And this is where the whole idea of a patriarchal interpretation of the Quran comes in, which many scholars have pointed out, like Asma Barlas, like Aisha Chaudhry. And the word, Arabic word Qunut, is about orientation towards God. The whole orientation is towards God. And that orientation implies that obedience is also owed only to God. In fact, I would say that Islam came and said the only submission you owe is to God. You don't owe submission to anyone else. That's why the Islam is so emancipatory. So to enslave a woman in obedience to husband is a form of enslavement. One of the reasons why our commentators have done that, if it's okay, Leena, I'm just going to quickly share. This is just one slide where I just want
Please, yes.
listeners here to understand why this happened, why our scholars consistently, especially our scholars of the pre-colonial, pre-modern era, why did they consistently translate this as obedience towards husbands and kind of change the whole purpose of this ayah, I'll just share my screen quickly.
Yep.
And I will bring up, I hope everybody can see that. I've taken this from Professor Aisha Chaudhry's book, which was based on a PhD thesis, Domestic Violence and the Islamic Tradition. And she draws attention to what she calls an idealized cosmology. So this is how you try to understand God's master plan. And our scholars then say that what an ideal cosmology is. They idealize it. This is what they think the divine cosmology is. So for our traditional scholars, this cosmology is patriarchal. So that's the bit where it says that women can only reach God through the mediation of their husbands, right? So you have God, you have husbands, you have wives. That is what gets read into the Quran. And this particular ayah exposes that, as you said, Leena, it exposes that when you turn Qunut towards the husband, that's what you're doing. Whereas your reading, my reading, the reading of Asma Barlas and Lali Bakhtiar and all the other scholars, Professor Khalid Abul Fadl or Mufti Abu Lais or various other scholars, Shabir Ali, Dr. Abla Hassan, is the egalitarian cosmology. What we are saying is that the Quran thinks that men and women are equal and they can both access God equally, right? So that's the egalitarian cosmology. So that's how a scholar's lens through which they translate and understand the Quran becomes really pertinent, because that lens then gives us clues into how they're interpreting the Quran. So we have, up until very recently, had this way of interpreting. And the neo-traditional scholars of our era, and that's scholars like Maulana Maududi, for example, even more progressive scholars like Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, they still, when it comes to this verse, subscribe to this patriarchal cosmology. And they will put in brackets. If you look up their translations, they will put in brackets that men are in charge of women, and devout women will obey their husbands. So the measure of devotion is your obedience to your husband, and that's where some of the contradictions then start emerging in this verse itself. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll make sure that I send this across to your team as well, Eram, for editing the video. But it's important for us to understand the factors behind such readings emerging. And this is Aisha Chaudhry's theory, that this is why we see these readings. Just one final comment quickly on women being in that state of Qunut, is that the word Qanitat, or the word Qanit, is also used for Maryam alayhi salam. And Maryam did not
Ibrahim
have a
alayhi salam.
husband.
And Ibrahim.
So she was one to have Qunut.
Wow.
Right? But for women particularly, I think, Iram, the point here is about, because Maryam alayhi salam did not have a husband. So who was she directing her kunut towards? It's always towards God. And it's really important that we understand that women only owe obedience to God. I was just saying that this ties in with the very theology of the Quran. The whole idea of Tawheed, monotheism, is that our devotion is towards God, and therefore our obedience is only towards God. We submit to Allah. That is the direction of Qunut. So to actually add in brackets anything to do with obedience of husbands, I would argue, is to do violence to the Quran and to do violence to the theology of the Quran.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so now hopefully our audience is beginning to understand this is how the lens gets distorted. So if you don't understand the Quran like we are talking about it today, then if you hear the hadith that the wife, if I had ordered anyone to prostrate to another human, then it would be wife to a husband. We are able to, in the past, accept it because we have already been conditioned. But if you actually understood Tawheed really well, and that Qunut can only be for Allah and nobody else, and what Qanita and Qanit means, you will immediately know that this hadith cannot be true, because we are on Tawheed, and every Muslim man and every Muslim woman equally has to be on Tawheed. So that's one thing. Now, I hadn't seen this diagram, Sitara, until yesterday, and for 3-4 years, I've been, because as you know, I'm a life coach also. I talk about marriages and stuff. And maybe my viewers remember, I have talked about the love triangle, that if you want to have a happy marriage, you need to be in a love triangle. And the love triangle is with God being on top and husband and wife being on the bottom. And this is a stable, in geometry, we can see this is a stable form. It can remain stable like this, but the other one cannot be stable. It cannot be upheld. It cannot have any kind of long-term permanence to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an important point. Going back to this word Qanita that Sitara was also talking about, and you rightly pointed out that when you're talking about Hazrat Maryam and Quran mentions that, obviously she had no husband. So which husband is she being devout to? And this also helps you to understand, this is the beauty of the Quran, what Leena was talking about. There is coherence. If we actually do tadabbur, we will see how beautifully Quran explains itself. I want to read a couple of things here from Daisy's book, if I may. According to Amina Wudud, the Quran never orders a woman to obey her husband. It never states that obedience to a husband is a characteristic of a better woman, nor is it prerequisite for a woman to join the Islamic community. So a lot of women who are converting to Islam, they shrink back because they're told, well, you have to be obedient to your husband. What's the name of that guy who's very popular now on different podcasts, a convert to Islam? but he basically promotes this idea that I converted to Islam because I want to have obedient women. You know who I'm talking about? Maybe the audience knows. A very controversial figure. And it's very offensive that Andrew Tate, thank you. Yes. So yeah, it is so offensive, but he uses that as an excuse that, hey guys, you don't like Western women anymore because they want equal rights. Go to Islam because you can oppress women and they have to be obedient to you, and you can have multiple wives too. So that's his reason. And foolishly, we keep sharing his videos because we think, oh, look at him, you know, white guy converted to Islam and he's going on all these shows. And it's sad because he's representing a wrong picture of Islam, and it is an oppressive picture of Islam. Also, I want to quote here, you guys might want to pull this one up, 66, ayat number 5, Surah 66, ayat number 5, which is, oh, I don't have it pulled up here. Here we go. So this is, which surah is this? Tahrim. Surah Tahrim, where again, this word has been used, Qanitat. Perhaps if the husband were to divorce you all, his Lord would replace you with better wives who are submissive to Allah and faithful to Him, devout, repentant, dedicated to worship, fasting. So I just wanted to give that as a reference as well, that if you want to, when you do your reading later on. So that was 66:5. And then you mentioned 33:35, where it's a beautiful verse, one of my favorite verses, where Allah mentions, Salihin, Salihat, Qanitin, Qanitat. So they're being mentioned side by side. So if Allah is mentioning Qanitin and Qanitat, so if we use this translation, that is the problematic translation. So suddenly, in a beautiful verse about who are these, men and women who have been favored by Allah, the man is devoutly obedient to Allah, and suddenly wife is obedient to husband. And I just want to mention here that, this very popular word now in Pakistan, taghut, because there was such a scandal around it. Taghut is a system that basically, a person or a system that tries to uphold or establish its authority over Allah's authority. So whenever we try to give authority to someone over Allah, that is a taghut, and that is the biggest shirk biggest sin in Islam, which is shirk. We cannot assign partners to Allah or His attributes. So obedience only belongs to Allah. So I just wanted to add that part. And if you have something to add, good. Otherwise, we'll move on, I think, to Nushuz.
Yeah, I'll just briefly, if it's okay, Eram, say that sometimes I think as Muslims, we can feel a bit defensive and apologetic because we think that patriarchal readings were a particular problem with Islam. They're not. In Christianity, in Judaism, again, patriarchal interpretations have been more dominant. It is only recently that they're changing. So Islam is not alone in this. And the reason for that is that patriarchy has been the dominant system, not the only system. There have been very many very successful matriarchal systems in the world, but patriarchy has been dominant. So Islam is not alone in this. You can read statements from St. Paul, and I'll briefly read if that's okay before we move on. So St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, you can find it in the Bible, Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2 to 16. This is dated between 52 and 60 century, so roughly about 50 years after Jesus passes away. And he says, I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man. And the head of Christ is God. And then he says, a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. And it is for this reason that a woman ought to have authority over her head.
Assalamu alaikum, this is Eram Saeed. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this content, please make sure to like and subscribe, and also to share with others that may need to watch this and help us spread the message. And if you haven't already done so, please go to jamali.love to download some free gifts that I have prepared for you, including a video that will help you to transform your most painful past trauma in 15 minutes or less. All these links are going to be in the description, so make sure you check that out as well.
So, Islam is not alone in this. I think we need to be feeling not very defensive about these things. We are dealing with a historical civilizational journey, and we're at a turning point. And it's important to understand that kind of big, long lens of history and keep it in mind when we come to these discussions, because sometimes, especially if we are up against Islamophobic comments, people will say things like, oh, Muslims are wife beaters, Muslims are wife beaters. I think what that should tell us is that we have more of a responsibility to re-engage with the Quran and learn to read the Quran in non-patriarchal ways and read it in egalitarian ways, so we can start that process of change. But Islam is not alone in this. This journey has happened with other religious traditions as well.
And somebody just said that, Islam encourages, we are ordered as children to be obedient to our parents. And there I will say one thing, yes, but as adults, we're not supposed to be obedient to our parents. We're supposed to have love and mercy for our parents. We're supposed to speak to them with kindness, with respect. We're always supposed to be respectful towards our parents. I think in especially the Indo-Pak culture, this idea has been so problematic and honestly is destroying marriages, because the son gets blackmailed a lot, right? He's quoted this a lot, that you have to be obedient to your parents and you have to do what they say. And most of the times that is oppressing the wife. And because the man thinks this is my religious obligation, he does that. And his religious obligation, as you can see here, is actually that, in this verse, we can see that what Allah is ordering men to do towards women. So again, we need to be clear about the Quran. And so Natasha, for you, you can relax, because as an adult female, you don't have to be obedient to me. Maybe I'll take that back this evening. You have to be obedient. But basically, just wanted to clarify that as well, that obedience belongs to Allah. So if we are, as children, we are told that be kind to your parents, be respectful towards your parents. We have this beautiful dua where, oh Allah, help me to take care of be kind to my parents as they were kind to me when I was a child. It's about mercy, it's about compassion, it's about that respect. And so if we are being obedient to Allah, we will automatically be good to our parents. I hope that clarifies it.
But
And
also, it's a different relationship. It's a different relationship. Your parents raise you when you were a baby. They feed you, they clothe you, they clean your bum. So you're physically dependent on them. Marriage is two consenting adults going into a relationship of commitment.
Yeah.
So when you put obedience into marriage, you are basically infantilizing the woman. You're saying that she's a child who needs to be looked after by this grown-up man. And infantilization in a marriage is a recipe for disaster. With parents and children, yes, parents do have more authority in that sense, and they do deserve that respect because they have raised us when we were helpless. A man is not raising a woman when she's helpless. He marries her when she's 20, 21, 25, 30, 50, 80. They are two adults who choose to go into relationships. So understanding marriage as a type of relationship is always a better paradigm than saying things like marriage is an institution and therefore some kind of subordination roles come in. So very different relationships.
Yeah. Leena?
Yes, I just want to also try and get us away from this idea that Qunut means obedience, because Qunut is a much wider concept of spontaneous, voluntary outpouring of reverence and devotion and piety towards God.
Wow.
So it's not just obedience. Obedience is it kind of almost doesn't feature in it, because if you're spontaneously having these feelings towards God and to what would make you closer to him and what would make him more pleased with you, etc. It's not about obedience. So I also want to try and get us away from thinking Qunut is obedience. It is not. It really
Would you
is
say
not.
it's a spontaneous surrender with love, devotion?
It's more of a surrender. It's related to reverence and piety as well. So surrender, reverence, piety. It's a whole attitude. It's an entire attitude.
Wow, I love that it's not just a word, it's an attitude.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
so
And
It's
I think this is
connection with
so important because we've just gotten so used to this obedience thing, obedience, and it's just simply, it's like taking a vast concept that is an attitude, as Eram so succinctly just put it, summarized it, and then we're putting it in a straitjacket and limiting it, and that it kind of rubs off on us without us realizing it. I also wanted to say, with regards to Sitara's comment about the Bible, what is said in the Bible, in the St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, it's true, we come at this, I hope, not out of defensiveness, but out of love for the Quran and the desire to understand God's direct word to us more fully, better. So I hope we come at it, all of us, from that perspective, not from a defensiveness. What is sad, though, is that we actually are so lucky to have that direct word of God, to have been so emancipatory for women, so incredibly respectful and advocating always for women to be included, to be lifted up, to be respected, to be given a full role in society. The sad thing is that we have that already, and then we took it and we allowed patriarchy to sort of go backwards.
yes.
It's funny. There's a saying. One of the Prophet's companions said something like, I think I've quoted you this before on one of your recordings, Iram, but he said something like, before Islam came along, we used to deal with our women much more easily. We used to deal with them in a much more relaxed way. But after the verses started to come and the Prophet came along with this new message and these new ideas, we started to be much more careful in how we dealt with our women. So what's disappointing really is that here we have an incredibly sort of forward-looking, ahead of its time, kind of direct word of God in the form of a book, and yet our societies have managed to take it in the other direction. So just a little comment on that.
Beautiful, thank you. And I want to address, there's some questions I see in the Q&A box. We will address them later. Because we don't, we want to make sure we finish this. I was going to skip over the part حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. However, may I share first, and maybe you have something to say about it, Leena? This beautiful attitude that you described about Qunut actually helped me to understand this part, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I thought, okay, she's just supposed to correct what Allah has put in Ghayb, or never made much sense to me. I thought maybe Allah is talking about chastity here. But based on what you said, which is this whole attitude, a Qanita would have this attitude of reverence and devotion and absolute surrender to Allah, which then makes sense that she is the Hafida of what Allah has put in Ghayb for her. So this is more in connection to her relationship with Allah, the reverence, the piety, because women are the teachers. Women are who are going to, be raising the children of the man, but they are also responsible for propagation of this beautiful tradition of faith. Faith is mostly, we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't feel it. So for me now, this translation is more about, they will protect what Allah has, bestowed to them in faith also. So I don't know, maybe I'm off. So that's why I'm presenting it to the two of you.
It could be. I mean, I think you can.
Oh, sorry. I just clicked the audio.
So the word ghayb, okay, so we are going to get into this. I thought we might have be skipping over this one, but the word ghayb, it can mean absence, which is why many of the translations say in the absence brackets of the husband. Or it can, ghayb can mean simply what is unseen and what is private, right? And I have translated it as what is private. So you have room to interpret it as keeping things that are private, keeping them private. And it could be this broader attitude that you were talking about. Or it could be keeping things that should be private, which could relate to chastity. It could very much relate to chastity, especially because the word that comes afterwards is nushuz, which we will talk about. So I like to stick more to the ghayb as privacy as opposed to absence, because then you don't have to explain, well, who's absent?
Yeah.
Because the Quran doesn't say it's the husband. It leaves it open to interpretation of all kinds of things that should be kept private or are sort of personal. And also then it allows us to move into the nushuz part of the ayah with a bit more context. But certainly interpretations or translations that insert, the husband after the word, they opt for the word absence for ghayb, and then put brackets the husband. I mean, I think that's just a bad habit that even good translators have recently been copying.
Yeah, I don't think there's any room to use ghayb as absence of husband. I love what you're saying, that it's more about private, and I do want to still explore what I talked about earlier, because the best of Qanitat were Ahlul Bayt, and they were in Islam, interestingly, the upholders of knowledge tradition were women, right? And the wives of the Prophet were secluded. They were seclusion, they were in homes, and basically they read, understood, and taught the Quran, as we know with Hazrat Aisha. So I'm going to explore that more in my head. Okay, good.
I love that you brought it up a bit, because it goes to show that when the translations try to limit the word of God, they actually also limit the possibility of interpreting it with a view to applying it in our lives. So I love that you picked up on that.
Yeah, and not a single one of us can claim to ever understand the Quran completely. That would be blasphemous. Allah's word is infinite, its meaning is infinite, and it is supposed to unfold and help us to engage with it and understand it in different ways.
Can I just come in on this point, Eram,
please.
around if I find myself agreeing with Leena more on this, because the progression of ideas I see is from the previous conversation in Surah An-Nisa about fahisha or indecency, which comes up again and again and again as a theme. And we would be linking that with nushuz as well. I know Leena would be linking that with nushuz. So the way I read it is that women who are devoted to God, Qanitat, an outcome of that devotion would be obedience. So obedience is an outcome. Being Qanit is an attitude, obedience is the outcome. And if you're obedient to God, then even when you have the opportunity to commit indecency in private, you're not going to take that. You're going to stay away from it.
Beautiful.
So that's how I see that reference. Allah always makes very graceful references to these things. So I see it as a very graceful reference that if you're devoted to God, then you're not going to commit the sin which can be hidden easily. And so you will stop yourself from doing that. And I think then that ties in with nushuz, which will come in a moment.
Thank you, Sitara. That was so nicely put. And it's so true, isn't it? That God approaches some of the prickliest subjects or touchiest subjects in the most graceful way in the Quran. He uses these turns of phrase that allow him to talk about even very sort of intimate matters in a gracious and graceful way.
Yeah. Which is why fahisha mubayyana, or open indecency or lewdness, then becomes a subject of this surah again and again, because actually fahisha can be hidden.
Yeah.
And so if a woman is devout, then she's not going to commit fahisha. She knows it can be hidden easily. And I think that's probably what the verse is getting at, but this is my interpretation of this.
Yeah, beautiful. If you like our content, please remember to subscribe and share this with whomever you think needs to hear this.